Well, we're recording in an sort of open space, and you're going to be able to hear some background noise for this recording. We haven't started yet, but the road is close by, and I am not in a soundproof area. And then I also decided to start the dishwasher an hour ago, thinking that'll be done by the time we start recording. So I really thought this through, proud of myself. But yeah, so let's just start the episode with comic and commercial actor Paul Morrissey. He's also a retired sports broadcaster. So we have lots of questions and we get into it. Let's go. Oh, hi, you're listening to Service from Hell, a podcast featuring people that are currently in customer service positions or the lucky few that got out and all of the good, bad, and infinitely irritating things that go along with that work. I'm actor and writer Kate Gaffney, and I'm uniquely qualified to discuss this, as I used to work at a very busy and very popular comedy club in Los Angeles, and at least one of you listening right now has probably grabbed me and told me you were ready to order when I was running around like a crazy person. So, let's eat. I'd like to welcome our guest, comic and commercial actor Paul Morrissey. Paul is best known for his many TV appearances on The Late Show with David Letterman and The Late Late Show on CBS. He appeared as a sports reporter in Nike commercials with NBA star Chris Paul, who I'm sure no one's heard of. Morrissey was a TV sports anchor for ABC prior to his career in comedy. You may know Paul as the co-host of the Come to Papa podcast with the lovely Tom Papa on the lovely Bill Burr's All Things Comedy Network. Morrissey also co-hosted the Artie Lang podcast, I love him, and is a frequent guest of I always mess this up, and is a frequent guest of the Bennington Show on SiriusXM. Paul is here to promote his newest special, Ice Cream vs. Everything, where he makes the utterly insane claim that strawberry ice cream is trash, and I will fight him over this. We almost didn't have him on as a result, but the rest of the album's really funny, so we relented. But Paul, have you learned the difference between Celsius and Fahrenheit yet? What's your favorite sports or team or both? And why did you leave broadcasting? Tell us.
Well, the first one is such a good question because I literally just crossed into the Canadian border in the last 20 minutes. So I just had to learn what kilometers were again because it's on the inside of the speedometer. But I've always said there's not enough space in between for Celsius because 0 is still cold. But then 4 is hot, and it just doesn't make any sense. It should be 0 and 100. That's the whole thing.
I agree.
But what was the second question? I forget.
No, that's it. You answered it. That was such a good podcast interview. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see. Just kidding. Is that what's your favorite sport, like the sport to watch, or your team, or both?
Sport to watch. Well, I grew up. I was. My dad was a gym teacher, so. He played college basketball. My brother loved basketball. He ended up playing baseball in college. And we're all, me and my brother are both short. But I just fell in love with basketball as a kid, even though I was really short. And I was terrible at it until about 9th grade when something finally kind of clicked. I did grow a couple inches. And then, I became, that's all I did. And so I still love. I played in college. I almost played professional. I was a coach at the college level, and then I also was covered the NBA as a sports anchor for ABC and stuff. So, but I do love sports and kind of I really got into the World Cup last year, and so there's sports that I haven't gotten into pickleball yet, but most sports I will. Try to at least understand, I guess. But I know some people are just they hear about sports and they're like, oh, I don't like any of it. And so I always feel like a misfit in a place of misfits because I'm not, comedy wise, to see me as a jock is really funny because no one who plays sports would ever see me. I'm 5'9". I mean, it's an incredible feat that I even played college basketball, much less was pretty good at it. So yeah, so the fact that I kind of I'm very nerdy about sports as I am about comedy. I love everything about comedy, and I'm kind of the same way with sports. But I don't think of myself as a bro-y jock kind of guy. I know most people who are as soon as they hear sports, I'm always one of those people. But
so
I'll ask you what your stance on sports is. It sounds like you Because you don't know who Chris Paul is, really?
Oh, I totally do. I love him. I think he's a great player.
Okay,
Yeah, I was just
gonna
being a
say,
jackass.
okay.
No, I love. I've never been to a professional basketball game, and I'm desperate to go. But I love college basketball. Was like my favorite because growing up, we would go to all the games because my dad was a professor at a college, and so we would like. I mean, watching college basketball is like one of my favorite things still. But I love on the professional level. I love to be at soccer games and at baseball games. That's like I go to those all the time. I know everybody thinks
Wow.
baseball is boring.
Yeah,
but-
where was the college?
he went to he taught at Xavier University in Cincinnati, so it was a Jesuit like tiny
yeah.
little but their basketball team's like decent, like they're not terrible. Where did you?
Yeah, they had a couple of people, like a couple of guards I really like were from Xavier, I think. Yeah, they're good. And who wasn't it? Popeye Jones or they had like one famous a big guy.
Oh,
Can't remember his name.
I can't either, but I'll look it up. But
they played in a good conference though.
They do
that
now.
Was fun.
Yeah,
That
it's
must
really
have been neat.
Yeah, we still go back and watch them. I love but it's so wild to like as I'm not college age anymore. I know, shock and awe, everybody. To go back and be like, who are these babies on the court? And it's like, oh right, they're like 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Like God bless, go for them. Enjoy your youth. But it is cool to watch them be that good. Where did you play college ball?
I played at Binghamton University, which is now a Division I school, and that's where Tony Kornheiser, that hosts the Pardon the Interruption. That's why he always talks about Binghamton, because he went there when it was called Harper College. That was but then it was kind of strange. I had a weird career because I was very small, and I was kind of like, I don't want to say like Steph Curry, but it was if you know basketball, the point guard back then was just like you just played defense and you brought the ball up and ran plays. And so you didn't even really in high school you could shoot and stuff like that, but in college, like if you tried to shoot, the coach would take you out, like especially if it was like one of those old school coaches that like wanted to run 90 different plays. So when I first got to college, I actually played at this really small Division III school called Hartwick College in Oneonta. And I started every game as a freshman, but it was just like one of those weird places where the guy was set in his ways. We ran, even our fast breaks had plays, and it was just very boring. And my dad was very ahead of his time. Like we shot tons of 3-pointers. I think our high school team averaged about 100 points a game, and we got to play in Ireland against like national teams and stuff. So he was really kind of cutting edge on like scoring, shooting 3-pointers, moving the ball. And he's like a Hall of Fame coach in high school in New York. So he was my coach, which was pretty amazing. So yeah, and so I actually played at this school, and then in the summer I finally gained some weight. I was like 17 when I graduated high school. So then I gained about 20 pounds of muscle, and I started playing against like NBA and Division I people in the summer, and they're like, "Oh, you're like a Division I player now." So it was like I started getting recruited and stuff, and then my dad, who retired from high school when I graduated, he ended up taking a junior college job in Binghamton. And so everyone's like, I got recruited by, it was Pensacola Junior College and a bunch of these like Division I big junior colleges. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, why don't you just play for your dad? So I got to play for my dad, and then we went to the junior college national championship. So that was like amazing. It was so much fun and such cool memories. And then from there, I was kind of like the local kid that was in Binghamton. So when Binghamton was going Division I, it was like a big deal to like, we got Paul Morrissey, blah, blah, blah. And so I ended up being the starting guard at Binghamton, but that coach was like 72 years old and was like chasing Dean Smith's record and all that kind of stuff, and ended up, not he's no longer with us, and a lot of the people aren't either. So I don't like to say bad things, but basically at the end of the season, he told me I was too short to play there, which is kind of crazy because like I kind of won 4 games for them single-handedly. So So I was like, I had 1 year of eligibility left, and I already had my degree. And so this great coach who I knew through one of my dad's players was taking over at Cortland State, which was like this really kind of powerhouse school near Syracuse. Like the new coach of the Red Wings was like the goalie there when I was there. And so I transferred and I played for Cortland State when we got to play against Binghamton twice, and I lit them up both times. And they actually asked me about it. And I said, "Well, the coach said I was too short to play here," and that's actually kind of what got him fired, because it ended up being he was doing a bunch of stuff that was kind of messed up, and a lot of people weren't happy with it. So it was like a struggle. Like I said, the style of play, the fact that I was like shooting, like even at Cortland, the guy, like the coach, didn't really know what to do with me. I led the nation in 3-point shooting. I had like 26 points off the bench, and they're like, "You're not really the point guard, but you're our best shooter." And so it was like a weird thing to deal with. And now, like everyone, you see. Kyrie Irving and the point guard is kind of a lot of times the best shooter, but and is allowed to score. But back then it was just very strange that like the point guard would be just like taking a lot of shots and stuff like that. And I still was very like team oriented too. Like I was never like just shooting like 40 times a game. I always shot like a really good percentage and that kind of thing. So I still love basketball. The only place I could have played after, as I had a chance maybe to play in Ireland where a couple of my dad's players played, but then the Washington Generals, which is a team that gets beat by the Globetrotters every game, and two of my friends did it, and I was taking stuff too seriously, so I was like, "Nah, I can't do that." And so, and my buddy's like, "You combine my three favorite things: traveling the world, shooting 3-pointers, and playing no defense." And I was like, and I feel like now I should have done it at least for a summer, obviously, to have that like experience and have those stories. But it was like a natural progression. Like I kind of coached I was an assistant coach for like a year, and then the TV guy that covered my team was like, "Hey, why don't you be my intern?" And so that was when ESPN was getting kind of big. And so I got into like sports, and I was never a TV person or anything. Like sports is what got me in front of a camera. And so I worked in Binghamton, and then I did an internship at Phoenix. I was kind of behind the scenes, and I got an on-air job in Northern California, and basically was like doing on-air stuff there. And the woman, this great woman, Karen Anderson, who was doing like the open mic night in Sacramento, she was like, "Hey, you're really funny on the news. You should do stand up." And then, I just kind of like lucked into it and fell in love with stand up after doing it. And she ended up being the head writer on the Ellen DeGeneres show. She's won like 30 Emmys. Like she's still like one of the most successful writers I know. And so it was just lucky that I met her. So that's kind of the long story how I ended up in comedy. But yeah, it was a weird transition.
I just love that the intersection between sports broadcasting into stand-up, because, there's so many people who self-congratulate and get into open mics because they're like, "Oh, I crushed in high school. Like I was so funny." And then they get into the open mic circuit and they're like, "Oh, this is a slog. Like no one's laughing," not recognizing that the beginning is the hard part for like finding your stage presence and whatnot. But I feel like broadcasting would have served that, because you already knew high pressure. You already knew think on your feet. You already knew like memorize dialogue. Like you had a lot of things already covered that like normal new open micers take a couple years to kind of get into. So you had, even if you were just moderately funny, which you're very funny, but I mean, even at the time, if you were just okay, you had those boxes ticked already. So I think you had a leg up. That's huge.
Well, I mean, and it became like, so, when I first took that job, I was the weekend sports anchor who Rich Eisen actually went right from my station to ESPN. So I basically had his old position. I had his boss, by the way. And so So I was doing news 2 days a week. So I was doing like, and I was still goofing around. They want you to cover murders and stuff, and I'm like, I don't want to. They sent me to like a park where there was a shooting. I was like, I don't want to go anywhere near that place. Somebody got shot there, and they're like, no, that's why we need it. And so I was doing like, interviewing one of the guys from Airplane and just doing lines and using clips from like So I Married an Axe Murder, and like I was just doing all the wrong stuff. And so basically, I think they stopped. They promoted me to sports anchor just so I would stop doing news stuff. But to your point, like, they would basically say like, hey, we need 4 stories today. And I'm like, what do I do? Like cause a car accident, or what do you want me to do?
Yeah, what is that?
And so, yeah, it just makes you kind of like, well, I got to come up with something, let's ask people what they want for Christmas at the mall, or, what movie is like the hot thing out. So it's like, you kind of learn to be, productive. And I was a one-man band. So it's like, I had my own camera. I had had to record all my sound stuff, had to edit everything. So, and then you had to write all your story copy. So, which by the way, I don't know if they still have typing in high school. I'm sure they have keyboarding or computer, but that still is the best course that I ever took. And it was probably 2 months of my life, but the fact that I can type without looking at my fingers has been, especially for that job, that was like, got me right into, where I could write stuff for stand-up, and you start writing in how you speak, you start correcting words that you don't say correctly, and also you're on TV, live TV, you can't swear, you have to cover time, so it's like the greatest improv class ever that you have to like keep your cool. So to that part, I would say yes. To getting the audience reaction, all that kind of stuff, that's something you definitely have to just do stand up to do it. But also the other important thing was I was 3,000 miles away from anyone that I knew. So even being on TV, nobody was going to see me. I didn't have the pressure of like all my friends or my parents watching. And I think that's what holds people back from like truly doing what they want. Even musicians or something, they just don't do it because, oh, what would, I have friends now, they're like, yeah, I didn't know you were funny, and it's just like, yep, I was.
I agree with you. I think that the removal of that, knowing that people that you knew were going to watch you is huge. It's interesting that I think that it's a slog I don't totally understand. Former guest of the podcast, Chester Lampkin, is a good friend of mine, and he's a weather reporter, and he's been all over the world doing that professionally on television. Oh, wow. And he said the thing that they don't tell you, that is not shared in the beginning, is that you're basically getting paid like via, I mean, it's not called an internship, but it kind of is. So like you're making below minimum wage, and so you have to have a secondary job. But he was doing morning news at the time, so he's like, I'd be up at 3 a.m. trying to get the weather patterns sorted so I could be camera ready by 6. And he said, but I worked my night job until midnight the night before. He was like, it's just this slog they don't tell you about. Because when you're in local markets trying to get to the big time, like if your aim is, national, like CNN or something, you have to play that game. So did you have that same experience where you're like, okay, well, I can do this for now?
Yeah, what market was he in, do you know?
That when he was there, it was Colorado and New Mexico were the 2 worst experiences that he had. He was very, very new to weather reporting.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, so basically, the whole thing is it's just like learning like how to do. Not that you have to like mail tapes to clubs anymore, but like it was basically like there's 200 markets in the whole country, and so that means there's maybe 3 stations, and they each have 2 sports guys. So you're talking about less than 1,000 people doing this job. So even that was like lower stakes than playing college basketball, like that was like a super long shot to get an on-air job. But yeah, my contract was, I think it was $16,500 a year, which is basically minimum wage. I got a clothing allowance of $500 at JCPenney, which was like enough for 2 half suits. So I was the weekend anchor, so I needed 2 jackets, 2 different shirts, and 2 different ties. And I would always wear shorts under the desk and, sneakers. And then I got a free haircut somewhere in town, and like I think that was about it. So I mean, there was people who, like from USC, or it was their first on-air job, so they would move there, and they would have like family money. But like, yeah, the people who moved there like me, we didn't take it. The thing was, we didn't take second jobs because you were working so much, and even when you weren't working, you were like learning how to do stuff. It's a very like it feels like an internship, because like I had to learn. I never shot anything on a camera before. I used a disposable camera. That was it. And I had to, like, my first weekend, I had to shoot high school football highlights with this, like, they were still shooting on 3/4-inch tape, which is even like ancient back then. So I had like a little like a tape like that you had to carry on the left side, and then put the camera on your right shoulder, and then just figure out how to, and the whole thing of the life experience of it was like, you do just have to learn trial by fire and just pick things up, because there's no way they can teach you exactly what to do. Like the weather guy, it's funny that you say that, because my backup sports guy, the weather person called in sick, and he had to learn how to do weather in like 4 hours. And so basically he got all the charts that all the weather people get, and you're kind of just filling time and putting in that information. And he was just like good at it, and they made him like the morning show host, because he could do the weather and also do the news. It's funny how they figure out like, oh, we don't need to pay another person to do that. He can just do
anything to save that money. So, well, did you see that viral video during when the Buffalo blizzard happened this past year? There was the sports guy did have to do, I mean, it was that exact scenario. He had to do weather because he was stuck at the station, but he knew nothing about nothing. And so he was like, I don't know, I think I'm supposed to go outside. Oh, it's still snowing. And it's so earnest, but it's like, it's very funny. But yeah, it's I think I underappreciate how difficult doing all of that is, because we see it done so fluidly that it's like, oh yeah, you just like the camera's on and you just do stuff. And it's like, yeah, no, it's all the prep work. It's kind of like comedy when you see someone's finished special. Like people probably see Ice Cream versus Everything and they're like, Paul's really great. That seems easy. He's got it. That's funny. I laughed a lot. And then you're like, yeah, this was I ate shit at open mics trying to sort out this material for, well, you probably don't eat shit anymore, but like, it's just that it's the prep stuff.
No, it's and there's people, I guess the biggest compliment you get is that it doesn't feel like you're working that hard. Like it seems easy. And so if you make it seem conversational and seem like you're not trying too hard, I always like that kind of comedy, which by the way, when I first moved to LA, it was kind of not to throw like Dane Cook under the bus, but it was very like everyone was energetic and running around and you had to shout jokes and stuff. And so for me, I love Mitch Hedberg and, Jim Gaffigan and the guys that had great jokes, and they weren't from when you worked at the club, those were always the people that made the audience, weird, is the ones that would like yell in their face and make them, I just wanted to be like a relaxing, fun atmosphere. And I do have a little bit of a laid back persona, even though I'm from New York. And so that's why I would say, and I did talk about, I got to meet Mitch Hedberg once, and he was doing Jimmy Kimmel. And after he had the health problems, Jimmy was the one guy that had him on because nobody knew how healthy he was. And so I ended up going there and seeing the taping, and then I met him. That was back when Jimmy had that really cool green room with like video games and food and stuff. So I just ended up saying hello to him. I was like, hey, I just want to say I'm a comic and I love your stuff. Great job, man. And so he ended up like walking over to me later on. He's like, so how, where'd you move from? Or like talking to me. So I'm like, I was in New York for a few years. And he's like, how'd you like that? I was like, I don't know. I mean, I like LA. Seems like people are more like successful. And by that, I mean, not to put down, like I did my years in New York, but it seemed like like I met that woman who was in my who got me started, Karen Anderson. I went out before I moved to LA. I went to visit her, and it was her, Karen Kilgariff, who does the My Favorite Murder
Yeah.
podcast now.
Yeah.
Like Sue Murphy, like it was all the most like everyone was successful and working on a TV show, and like in New York, Dave Attell and all these guys who are the best comics in the city were complaining about like how their rent's too expensive and they can't, their car doesn't work and stuff like that. So I'm like, so I don't know. It just felt timing was right, not to like put New York down, but it just felt like to my lifestyle it was better, and that's what Mitch went to New York too, and he said they just didn't get me. I guess I was too like happy and laid back or something, and so when I said, yeah, I kind of like it here, I did a showcase already for something, and he's like, he goes, yeah, look around, man, you can get discovered in this room. And I was like, this is pretty cool. So that was like a fun like moment to have with somebody, and somebody like that is no longer with us, and to get the experience of like, you got to keep working, you got to keep getting better. So yeah, all those kind of little things help you along the way, especially when you don't have any credits and stuff like that. When you meet somebody that you're really look up to comedy wise, and they give you a little bit of pull back the curtain a little bit and show you what it's like and keep going, man, that kind of stuff.
Well, and they're also the fact that he reflected a similar experience and commiserated with you, it makes you feel less crazy, and you think, okay, it wasn't comedy that was the wrong fit, it was just the city. And I think that that's a really powerful, bolster as well, because I think sometimes when you don't know which coast to go to, because it's got to be LA or it's got to be New York, I think I know it can talk people out of it. I have dancer friends who started in New York and they're like, it must be dance. I can't hack it here. Then they came to LA and then they went on tour with like huge acts because they were like, oh, it was literally just the city. Like New York just wasn't for me. So that's awesome.
Yeah. It seems like New York is a more, not a dues paying place, but like, at least for me, like, so I was doing the road a little bit in California, and then I quit the TV job and moved to New York and kind of like resigned to like I'm starting over. And even then, like I went to grad school at NYU and got my master's in education. Like I did student teaching and everything. Like I was working like crazy the whole time. But I met Jim Gaffigan. Like Ed Helms was like running the open mic night at the Boston Comedy Club, and Jim he had toured a little bit, but he had just started getting pretty not famous as he is now, but like just doing clubs. And so he really liked me, even though I was doing like pale stuff and stuff about food. I think we were just really similar. And he, he knew kind of my style. And, so he took me to a bunch of clubs, and, I did like the Columbus Funny Bone, DC Improv, that kind of stuff. And that helped me out. But in the city, there was the whole thing of like, oh, you got to pass the club. You got to go every 6 months. And I always hated that whole thing. And they would say to you, like, unless somebody dies or moves to LA, we're not passing anybody. So I just did like all alternative shows, that kind of stuff. And then my one big thing back then, which I don't know if it's as big now, like you could enter like contests, like Wendy's would have a contest or Comedy Central would have like an open mic contest, and I would never win them, but I would seem to at least get in like the top 5. Like there was one that was called the Maxim's Real Men of Comedy, and the finalists were me, Tom Segura, and Adam Devine. And like the winner got to open for Joe Rogan, which is how Tom met Joe Rogan. But the other one was this Wendy's thing. You got to perform in the Vegas HBO festival, which was really cool. And the winner got to perform on Ellen, which my friend was like a writer on, and I knew the whole staff. And so like, if there was anything that you're like, oh, I'm like a shoo-in for this, but then I lost. And so, but the great thing was, went back to LA the next week, and they were doing like a showcase for the Late Late Show. It was Craig Ferguson back then. and I just went there to see who was showcasing, and then at the booker Adrian, who worked for Adam Sandler at the time, he was running the showcase, and I was like, "Hey, I'd love to get on this showcase sometime." He's like, "I just saw you at the HBO thing. Great job." He's like, "I think you can do that set on there." So like, I basically got that set from like losing the contest. So
Silver lining.
that's another good thing of like just keep putting stuff out there because you never know who's watching. Like, oh, my best example of that was you probably might have been around when the roast battle just started, and he won't mind me saying this. Jesse Joyce, he writes for Jimmy Kimmel and he's written for the Oscars and won a ton of Emmys. He used to write for Greg Giraldo on the roast, and really funny comic. But he did the roast battle, and it was just at one of those nights at the Comedy Store, not even the televised one. And he lost to Earl Skakel.
I love Earl.
And,
Hi, Earl, former guest of the podcast.
Yeah. And Earl is like, professional wrestler. It's just like a whole different animal. And Jesse's just a great joke writer. But, in that setting, and, that's Earl's hometown is a home club is the Comedy Store. Like, he lives there. So he had like a home field advantage. But Jimmy Kimmel was one of the judges. And so even though Jesse lost, Jimmy liked his jokes so much that he hired him to write on the show. So that just shows you like any kind of exposure is good exposure. Like, don't always see things in like wins and losses,
I appreciate that perspective. I think that's totally true, especially in comedy, because you don't know who's in the room. There have been people, I don't understand audience members that come to open mics. I'll look around and I'm like, this is real audience. You're about to sit through 2 hours of this, and they watch and then they leave. And I'm like, who were you? Like, who hurt you enough that you felt like this was the show you wanted to see? Like, good for you. Okay, well, I want to get to the questions before everybody kills me for not getting there. Okay, so, folks.
No, I'm sorry for
I love it.
Got me reminiscing, but yeah, it's always cool to like remember some of those stories because even I don't write enough of this stuff down. So thanks for.
I love it. No, I really love it. Okay, so before we get to the next section, which is the hammer questions that everybody wants to know, I just have to know about your mom doing her 29th marathon. Like I've done 2. The day you talk me into doing 27 more. Like, no thanks. So how did she...
Which one did you do?
I did San Diego and I did LA. So I did one in 2005 and then I did one in 2015 or 2013. But you got to tell me, like, what, how did
she... That's amazing.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's like, it's on the album, some of it, but like, yeah, it's a real thing where she's an oncology nurse and it was a nurse her whole life, but she smoked until she was 40. She really was trying to quit it. And that's what finally made her quit, was she wanted to start running. And, or not running, but she wanted to quit smoking. And so started running, even like tore her ACL like in the 80s. And like, just got a new one, got it replaced like a couple years ago. And now she's like better than ever. Because ACL you can run straight ahead, you can't go side to side. So she didn't even need that for running races. But she just started running because of that. And then, she did Boston a few times, but New York has been her thing of like, she always raises about, $8,000 to $10,000 for Sloan Kettering every year. My brother's a cancer surgeon also. So like that part of the family is kind of like, medical based. And then it's just a fun thing. My mom needs the release. Like even I just went to visit them. I flew in on a red eye and my Uber guy was like pulling up to they have this kind of like community that's built on a golf course in Florida. And literally my mom's like running down the middle of the road and we're like coming up there and I'm like, I tell the Uber guy, like, that's my mom right there. And she ran like 12 miles that morning, even though, because it just gets so hot in Florida. So, and she would do that in New York in the wintertime. So it's pretty crazy. But she loves running and, it's especially for that generation, she's 76. And so even when she runs now, people didn't even jog back then. Like men they played sports, but they didn't exercise. So like, she'll even run like on the golf course, and everyone's like, "Why are you running?" And she's like, "I just like to run." Like they think it's because like you have to do it. So, but I know there's Michelle Wolf does those like ultra marathons
Yeah.
and stuff. There's a few people. Moody McCarthy, my buddy, has done the marathon a couple times. My brother actually ran it with her once, but didn't train. He's a good athlete, but he didn't really train like because that's a rough thing, and so it kind of messed up his knee a little bit. So that's why, not that I would ever do it, because I think I'm in my attention span is not good for that. I think it's a mindset. Like when you did it, I'm sure it's just like you have to not only believe that you can do it, but have to be able to kind of like shut your brain off and focus on things and just keep going. So what made you want to do it?
The first time was because my friends were doing it and I was just dumb and young and I was like, sure, this sounds easy and cool. Yeah. And then the second time was because I was like, I hate my job. I hate what I'm doing. I'm not pursuing anything in entertainment. I'm miserable. So I'm like, I know. I'll just add 6 months of training on top of my misery. But it helped because mentally I just needed something else to focus on. And then I raised money for an organization. And so it was like, oh, I feel like I have purpose. And then after I ran the marathon, a month later, I quit my job and then traveled the world for a year. So, you do what you do what it takes to fucking, you have to be crazy to do marathons. That's why when you said you're on the album, when you at the time of recording, your mom was 75, and I was like, holy shit, like how because I think of doing it now and I'm like, do I have it? And then after that I was like, fine, if his mom can do it at fucking in her 70s, maybe I do another one. So I think it's very inspiring.
Now it's easier than ever. She gets to start closer to the start line.
It's great. Her corrals earlier, it's great.
Yeah, now her age group is 75. Like she won a Tiffany plate last year. Like she gets to win things now. So like now she's like, this is easier than it's ever been. So I'm gonna keep doing it. So
bless her.
And it's her big I think it's also important to have like a goal and something even if it's like a 6 month or whatever. That's what's so hard with comedy now, that everyone wants to do these hour specials. And I would work really hard on these, I was lucky enough to get to do a bunch of late night spots. So a 5-minute spot, that's, especially when you're starting out, there's some people that never get that great 5 minutes. And then once you do it, you're like, oh, this is how you hone down. This is how you edit a great 5 minutes. And everyone that's doing these hour specials now, they never learned how to do that. So if you know how long it is to make the great 5 minutes, then you build on that. Whereas people now are starting with so much extra, and then there's still a lot of stuff that you can take out. So I still build things on 5-minute increments, because that's kind of how I learned how to tighten stuff up, Yeah. But it is weird that I don't know. I guess people enjoy hearing the longer stories and stuff. If you like somebody and you're already a fan, you'll kind of listen to them talk and explore more. But for somebody who's never seen you, to have some really loose version of all your jokes, I don't know. I can't do that.
Yeah, I just saw Dan Levy. He's not Dan Levy. Levy? Is it? I don't know how. Not the guy that from Schitt's Creek, but he's a writer on TV and he's a comic. I just saw him the other night at the Ice House, and I started counting because it was such a joke machine. My abs hurt. I was like, how is he coming? And it was every 5 seconds he had a joke, and because I was like, there's no way. Why am I laughing this hard? And it's like, oh, because he understands the rhythm, and he's assuming this crowd has not seen him before, and it was just like hit. I was like, that's mastery. I was so impressed. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to get to the point where it's I can just talk about super obscure things, but not obscure, but whenever we talk about get into running, and I can get into other stories, or where I grew up, there's all these kind of weird stories that come up. We were just talking the other day about how different things are. I grew up in a really small town. We just changed the mascot from the Indians this year. It just happened. But it was the 80s. They had this thing called the Strawberry Festival, and they had this like I think it was a hamster race or something like that. It was like this kind of race through, and and the sheriff was in it, and he told the guy like if his hamster didn't win, he was gonna eat it if it lost. And so the hamster lost. And this is like in the newspaper. You can look it up. Like a week in New York, 1983. Sheriff is. I think he didn't even get fired. He got like reprimanded because it made him. It was like insubordination. But he like put salt, pepper, and ketchup on the losing hamster and ate it.
Like ate it raw?
And just, I think so. I don't know if they prepared it or not. It's one of those things like, it still pops up in like the newspaper things because my whole thing now is like, especially even at the Comedy Store, you hear a lot of like tall tales at comedy clubs and stuff and catch people in some lies. So my thing now is like, even that story I tell about, we went to Ireland and we had the bus driver and I saw the same bus driver 15 years later. Like I have pictures of that guy. Like there's people that were on that trip that were in the room for the special. So my whole thing is like, I want to make sure people know, like, I'm not making any of this up. Like if this stuff is crazy enough for me to want to say at a show, it happens. So.
That's authentic comedy and audiences are smart. I think that's true. Okay. We have to push past this or I could talk to you for hours and hours. Okay, folks, we hope you enjoyed your apps. We're going to move on to the entrees after a quick break. We are back, and now it is time for the entrees. Okay, so Paul, I know you've listened and you get how this all works. We always start with the same question. What was the first job where the government was taking taxes out of your money? So the first job you had, you can say babysitting or whatever, but like, did you have a job in your early days that you were getting like a check for?
Yeah, so this was like I said, small town, the most cush job that you could get. This is funny how I see this as a cush job. My brother and my sister, I think, also did it. But so this is like when it might have been before my senior, you get to be I was the janitor at the elementary school, like during the summer. So it was like a 40-hour minimum wage week. And so you basically like painted the hallways in the elementary school. You varnished the doors. You waxed the floors. Like that was like the cush job. And I was still like, I was getting really good at basketball, so I would go to these like camps and stuff. And so I wouldn't do it the whole summer, but I mean at least 6 to 8 weeks I was working 7 a.m. to 3 o'clock, like as a janitor. And it was a good, I will say it's a good, I don't want to like look down at the work, but like everybody I worked with had made a few mistakes and like we're kind of like, yeah, if I'd have done it differently, here's what there was a guy who was like, I was in a band. I was supposed to go to Nashville, and things got, so he's like, make sure you follow your dreams and that kind of stuff. But then there was also like, we had a guy from, actually our church brought him over. He was from Vietnam. He was a soldier in Vietnam, like a scout for the U.S. Army, and was missing like a couple fingers and was like the hardest working guy you've ever seen in your life. And was cleaning toilets and running to like scrape up gum and stuff. So it's like, it was like, oh, if you have a job, work hard at it, and if you don't want to do it, then get another job. And I think to your listeners, like that's what especially in the service industry, it's like you should do everything that you're working at, you should do like full all in, because I think that's habits. You know what I mean? If you get to where you think you can half-ass something, then you start doing that for other things. And I think that's like a good lesson to learn is like, and we all know, like you work hard, time flies. So, but if it's something that's like sucking the soul out of you or something that's just not the right fit, obviously you can move on. But for the most part, that's kind of my thing is when you see somebody who's like doing a job, even if it's like a good job, and you just tell they're not really doing what they're supposed to. Like is the comics were so observational that we can see the guy who the guy at Chipotle that's not rushing back to the front line to take orders, and everybody hates his guts because he's just pretending he's checking something in the back or whatever. And
100%. I was just at Target the other day, and the guy, like, I walked up to the register to like check my stuff out, and the guy was on his phone, and I said, "Oh, sorry, are you open?" And he just looks up, and what I just did was nod. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe he's nonverbal. And so like he checks all my stuff out and like points to the screen. And I was like, oh, maybe this guy truly is nonverbal. So I was trying to be compassionate. And then he hands me my bags, and his buddy comes in line behind him, and he's like, oh, what's up, man? Like blah, blah, starts talking to him. And I was just like, what? I hate everything. Like, you don't want the job, don't do the job. Like, but you're at the job, do the job. Like, use your work. I was so annoyed. Okay, well, all right, that was your first job. So how many summers did you do that? Was that all the way leading up to college?
So I think that was at least 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And but I had like I worked at the YMCA, and that was like when the YMCA was like, they still had like the mentally ill people from the old hospitals would live in the rooms, like residents. Yeah, that's what they used to be, like they used to have actual rooms and stuff there. And,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, especially, I think New York City, I knew a bunch of guys who would like stay at the YMCA, like for, to go audition for stuff because it was like cheaper. But I think it's like, I don't know if it's like people just getting out of like, hospitals or prisons or stuff like that. There's definitely some kind of like transitional housing. At least there was back then. I'm sure there's, insurance that wouldn't cover that now. But yeah, we had, so I would have like all the rich people who were, they had like an exclusive club that you could pay for like towels, and you got your own YMCA t-shirt and shorts when you got there, all the bankers and jewelers and stuff like that. And then they would be mixed in with all these crazy people. And I use that affectionately because one of the guys they called Elvis, and he was dressed in full like cowboy with like fake guns and stuff like that, and would always come and like sweet talk me in the morning to try to get free coffee because I was working at the front desk. So so that was a pretty eclectic group, but I did it because I got to play basketball and got the membership for free and that kind of stuff.
Wait, don't transition out of this. I have so many questions. Wait. Okay. So like when you have this mix of humans on the various spectrums of mental illness, I'm including bankers in that, sorry. What would you like, would you ever were there, fights? Was there ever like conflict, or was it just kind of everybody cohabitated, understanding like, yeah, this is just the mix we're in?
Yeah, this was like in Binghamton, New York, which is a little more urban than when I grew up, or where I grew up, because if we had like 2 or 3 kind of like mentally ill or homeless people, we all knew them. Like in my hometown, like everyone just kind of like looked out for them a little bit. And then Binghamton, I think, was a little bit more like like people coming from other cities and that kind of thing. And so it was not there was definitely I remember this was really there was a kid. Oh yeah, these were kids. So they said that and this wasn't me, but these kids said that we forgot our locker combination. We need somebody to open it up. So like they got like a locksmith or somebody to open up the lock, and then like an hour later, this guy comes back and like, hey, somebody stole my stuff. And so it was like city enough where like kids would be smart enough to pull like scams like that. So, it was kind of a mix of people and but very good pickup games and good basketball players and good like kind of like street ball players that maybe didn't play in college but were kind of revered, and like Big Mike's here, or somebody famous that you knew. So it was kind of cool atmosphere to work in. And it was more social, like my friends would be there working out and stuff. But then service wise, I worked weekends as a bellman at a hotel, and that was like my first real like like you know you got to be there at 8 a.m. The owner comes at 9, and if you don't open the front door for him, you'll get fired, like that kind of stuff. And that's the stuff that really tests your patience of, I always did a good job as a bellman, but I was like, I kind of, you learn to like, oh, this guy's not working. You know what I mean? He owns the hotel, but he's not doing anything. You always have respect for, like, you work in a restaurant and the guy who owns the place starts vacuuming and doing stuff. Like, I always had more respect for people who kind of took initiative and, that kind of thing.
1,000%.
Yeah, just like the rich guy who owns the hotel that comes there for his coffee and his paper every morning, like, fuck you.
Yeah, 100%. So did you, when you were working there, was there ever an experience where you were like, the juxtaposition at the Y, where you were kind of just treated like a peer? You weren't treated like someone that was like working there, because it was sort of a hybrid. Was the bellman job, were there moments where you were like, oh, I'm absolutely being treated like a peon customer service person?
Oh, absolutely. I think even now it's hard to, because it's like you go to a hotel and like it's almost like when you work as a waiter and then you go back and you're just like, this guy's trying too hard. Like you go to like I don't know, some high-end steakhouse, but it's in like Cincinnati. It's not New York, and so they have a whole, they have their whole spiel, and they've been working their whole lives to like get this job, and but there's no heart in it. You know what I mean? They're just like, memorize this thing, and it's just like, you're trying too hard. We just want to eat, be a person, take care of things, all the upselling and the weird stuff but yeah, as a bellman, you can see immediately when people are just like treating you like crap and like want you to like just do stuff. And obviously like tipping was essential for that. Like there was a guy who worked there, like he got like a bad divorce, and I think he got his wages like, when they garnish your wages. Yeah. So he was basically like living off these tips, so if he could make 50 or $100, a weekend, and you could do that once in a while. I remember how much that meant to me when somebody would give you $5 for taking a couple suitcases. I remember like a big thing, if you had like a bus, it was like a prepaid like $2 a bag or something. So you would get like $2 a bag for all the stuff on this bus. So you'd get like, $50 or $100 just for like a bus tour or something like that. And so yeah, you remember how much, $20 means back then. So I don't take it lightly when, somebody's working a job like that and you can give them a little extra.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay. How many customer service jobs have you had total, would you say? Like, I include comedy, but not really.
Well, I mean, I will say I probably had a couple like tutor jobs. I did my student teaching. So I did like I worked for a place called Star Education in LA when I first moved. And I taught like podcasting and like magazine writing, stuff like it's like after school programs. I taught a roller coaster class that like we took all the kids to Six Flags, and they learned all the physics of the roller coasters and got to go on the roller coasters, which is kind of cool.
That's awesome.
It's so I
want to take that class now.
Yeah. And it's funny, there is like some kind of roller coaster alliance or foundation or something.
What?
And they actually pay for all the kids to like go to Six Flags at the end of the class. It's kind of cool. But yeah, I would say, I was a camp counselor at a lot of these basketball camps and stuff too. So I probably worked more as like teacher, mentor kind of thing than like actual service job. I worked like a concession at a car racing place, like on a Saturday. By the way, I did that. This is all like the same. I worked like the Hotel Bellman Friday night, and then worked at the YMCA. Like, I remember, you're bringing up bad memories, but I remember this is while I'm playing college basketball, by the way, and I also have two. This will make people not feel as bad for me, but but one of the shifts was like, I think it was 5:15 on Saturday morning. This is like when I'm a sophomore in college, so it's like that's not good, you know. And so I would have to get up at like 4:45, drive down there, and so what would happen is you're the YMCA. So there's all these like old people. I call them old, but let's be honest, they probably weren't. But they're just lined up to go into the pool, like first thing Saturday morning, like at 5. It opened at 5:30. Crazy enough, the Y on a Saturday, and so I get there at 5:15. You'd have to let everybody in the locker room, and then the pool opened at 5:30, and then honest to God, they would all be gone by 6 o'clock. And my big theory was that it was all old people who got up early to make sure they didn't die in their sleep. Why else would they do that? Why would you get up at 5 in the morning to swim for 10 minutes and then go back home? I think somebody just read in the paper that like all these people die in their sleep, so they're like, I'm just gonna get up at 4 in the morning then.
Because if I get up before the sun, I won't die. It's like they're werewolves. It's good. I mean, I get it. It's flawless logic. Okay, so it
would work. So I would work 5 to like 11, and then the racetrack would just be Saturday afternoons from like 1 to 4, and we'd sell hot dogs and all that kind of stuff. And it was. I was always had, and you didn't make any money. It was just enough to like pay for gas and some food and stuff like that. I had two really great jobs because of basketball. I got to be a janitor at the Broome County Arena, which it was all the athletes got this job. And so basically what they said is like, there's 4 locker rooms. Your summer job is to paint the locker rooms. So once all 4 of them are painted, your job is over. Do you understand? And so it was basically like you just did nothing the whole summer until like the last week, and then you paint all 4.
Of course. So, that's what a stupid. That's so dumb on their part. Like, oh, because you think I'm going to rush through this so I don't get paid the rest of the summer? Fuck you. I'm going to screw around. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was with like baseball players and one other basketball player, my roommate, and then. The other job was, and this is so funny because, so it was at Binghamton University. What they would do is they would hire like 4 people for the fitness center, right? Knowing that like one of them would show up. So like they'd have 2 basketball players, 2 regular students. And then it was kind of like the Sopranos, like no-show jobs where like, we're at basketball practice, so we're obviously not going, but we got paid to like be working at the fitness center that whole time. And I remember the supervisor guy that I met like the first day was always mad that we didn't have to show up for the job, and you could tell he always wanted to complain about it, but he just didn't. And so I went back and I performed at the Anderson Center at Binghamton University, and I opened for Bobcat Goldthwait. And, it's like a 5,000 seat place. The guy who was managing that venue was the guy who ran the fitness center.
Come on.
He was still mad that I didn't show up. He's like, you remember me? Probably not. You didn't show up for that job. Like, he wasn't even happy that I was a comedian. He was just like, we paid you for nothing.
I love. You know what though? I'm petty as fuck. I would probably be big mad years later too. Like I would for sure rush a stage to be like, you didn't do your job. I mean, I can appreciate where he's coming from. That's a great story. Okay. So if we were going to total out, so that was 2 great jobs where you were, okay, so that's 2. Then you said concessions 3, camp counselor 4, Bellman 5, tutor. I gave you 2 there, 6, 7, YMCA 8. So would you say like 10 customer service jobs? Would you guess that?
Dealing with actual customers, yeah. I'll give you. Here's one that I don't know if you ever got roped into one of these. So
Probably.
there was like a summer where you would check the want ads, and there would be these marketing jobs,
I've heard so many people have
and then
shared
you
about these. These are miserable. Go ahead. Go ahead.
and so you probably know this company. So it was Vector Knives. So
Is
they
that like
want you to
Cutco?
basically like it might be. It was basically like you had to they wanted you to like sell knives, but it was like they brought you in. They say like you make $1,000 a month or something like that, and blah blah blah. And so the whole thing was like you had to buy the knives yourself first, and then basically get like your family and everybody else to buy them. But in
This
the
is MLM.
beginning, for just the interview, it was like my first real like interview, even though it wasn't a real interview. And I'm dressed up, and the guy's like, "This looks pretty good." It's the whole thing is like they're taking everybody. That's the goal. So everyone applied for this thing, and you're like, "This looks pretty good." If we're interested, we'll give you a call. And then of course, like 15 minutes later, they call you, and then they're like, "Hey, are you free this afternoon for training?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is great." And then you come back, and there's like 100 people in this room, and they're just gonna run this video, and you're like, you fucking
Damn it.
got me. And then I just got up and walked out. Like